like doing stuff by hand and chassis development by hand, especially, there's a lot of stuff we still do that I can't get processed. Like we have dynamic compound radiuses that might have 3 different radiuses in one tube that contours the roof line. That just, there's not a machine as of right now that can do that stuff. And that's 80% of our stuff.
Welcome to the HPA Tuned In podcast. I'm Andre, your host, and in this episode, we're joined by Morgan Clarke from Clarke Design. Morgan sort of climbed onto my radar thanks to the Instagram algorithm, which kept serving me up pictures or posts about his latest project, which is an off-road truck kind of clothed in a Range Rover Velar body, which straight away piqued my interest, and the fabrication quality, the attention to detail, and the styling of this build just also was on another level. Also didn't hurt that it's powered by a sort of mid-rear engined Lamborghini, which again, not particularly conventional. And Morgan's got a really interesting backstory and has actually overcome a battle with alcohol and drug addiction to create what is a very successful company. His style or stance on fabrication and design is quite non-conventional compared to most of the guests that we've had on that are in a similar area of the motorsport industry, in that he doesn't heavily leverage CAD and 3D modeling and scanning with his projects. Most of his is done more, dare I say it, the old school way, with just conventional design and a try it and see approach. That's not to say that he is knocking CAD and 3D modeling and design. There is obviously always a place for that, but in particular with the one-offs that he's building, often this doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. Regardless of his approach to design and fabrication, you can't question the end result though. Before we jump into our chat, for those who are new to the Tuned In podcast, High Performance Academy is an online training school. We specialize in teaching people how to build performance engines, how to tune EFI, how to construct wiring harnesses. We also cover topics on fabrication, 3D modeling and CAD, race driver education, and data logging, just to name a few. You can find all of our courses at hpacademy.com/courses. All of these courses are delivered in high-definition video modules that you can watch from anywhere in the world, provided you've got an internet connection. This means you can learn from the comfort of your own place and you can learn at your own pace. All of our courses also come with a 60-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. So if you purchase them for any reason at all, decide it wasn't quite what you expected, no problem, let us know. We'll give you a full refund. And for podcast listeners, you can also use the coupon code podcast75. That will get you $75 off the purchase of your very first HPA course. We'll put the coupon code in the show notes to make it nice and easy for you to find. Lastly, if you like free stuff, then I've got a great deal for you. We are constantly partnering with some of the biggest names in the aftermarket performance industry to give away some great prizes. You can always find our latest prize at hpacademy.com/giveaway. It might be an aftermarket ECU or dash. It could be some engine components or engine building tools, or just about anything in between. They are great prizes and we will ship them free of charge to your door if you're the winner. There's no tricks here, no purchase required to get your name into the draw. All right, enough with our introduction. Let's get into our interview now. All right, welcome to the podcast, Morgan. Thanks for joining us today. This is one we've actually been chasing for a while. We've really struggled to basically be in the same place at the same time, but we've finally got it across the line. Now, you're a fabricator extraordinaire from sort of stalking your Instagram for a while, and as we always do, let's sort of start at the very start, and I want to learn about your background and particularly how you got interested in cars.
Sure. Hi guys, I'm Morgan Clarke. Gosh, where did I get started in cars? Well, you mentioned off-road. That was just not really by design. That was kind of default. I've been into cars since I could draw. Drawing has been my thing since I was old enough to hold like a paintbrush or a crayon in kindergarten and preschool. And once I got into maybe second or third grade, I was already drawing cars. By fifth grade, I was drawing 57 Chevys and drawing flames on them and hot rods. And then I was drawing military aircraft and vehicles. And, I've always been into the transportation in general.
But it sounds like you've also got a real flair for being artistic, which I'm going to get into in a bit, but I feel like there's a crossover between someone with a bit of an artistic slant and very good fabricators. I kind of feel like those two do go hand in hand.
Definitely, and it's more like I take the artist thing, but I really prefer designer because that's what I stress is design. I pay attention to design. I went to Art Center College of Design for transportation design. I dropped out of there, same major as Chip Foose, same school, but it's really stressing design in anything. Like that's what I love.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about what that specific school was. Obviously, you mentioned you've dropped out. That's probably not too relevant. But when you're talking about automotive design, is this around kind of the engineering concepts, basically making sure you're designing a component, for example, that's fit for purpose, is going to be up to the forces that it's going to be exposed to? Or is this more kind of like an artistic style of design?
So what Art Center provides is a bachelor's of science in transportation design. That's really, there's usually a war that goes on with automotive corporations and probably any other transportation corporations where there's a designer and there's an engineer, and they don't always get along because the engineer is the guy that takes whatever the designer creates and has to make it work and function.
Yeah. Yeah, so the designers just come out with something that looks cool, and then the engineer's like, well, yeah, that's great. How the hell are we going to make that work?
Exactly.
And then you've got to try and find some sort of happy medium ground where everyone's sort of, oh, yeah, well, that looks okay and we can actually make it.
Yeah, that's exactly how it goes. And it's always like that. I mean, I haven't worked in the automotive industry like that, but I have enough friends that are designers and I have enough friends that are engineers that are working in that industry. And that's always the clash. There's that. It's not that it's a disconnect, but there's just two jobs that need to be done there and they don't correspond well with each other.
Yeah, okay. So where does your engineering knowledge come from then in terms of the other elements that I just spoke about?
Sure. So really, I mean, I have a thorough background with off-road stuff, and I've always been kind of mechanically inclined as far as understanding things. Again, since I was little, I think a lot of people, even kids that play with Legos, and they, just there's something there with doing stuff with your hands and figuring things out. And with off-road, I tell that story a lot, but I saw this Prerunner truck when I was racing dirt bikes in the desert. And it was course marking a couple days before or something, or maybe even a week before. And it was a Ford Ranger. It had these big blown out fenders and it had like shocks through the bed and, big tires. And that was the one that left the mark on me. And I didn't really know what a Prerunner was before that. And I kind of fell into just a series of different things that showed me that these were real things. And trial and error on a lot of stuff. I think really I had a lot of inspiration from previous stuff I'd see on forums, race desert rides, desert rangers, where there would just be people posting pictures in the forums of their builds. A lot of that was race trucks, heavily influenced by just OG trophy truck design and engineering and understanding roll cage and chassis dynamics like that. That's where I got a lot of the thought process and just understanding, like riding in enough trucks, building my own, and then just understanding the load path and the transfer, and where when things crash, the points, it becomes pretty standard to figure stuff out. Like, when the car takes hits in certain places and where tubes need to be and learning about dead tubes and not having them. And I was so passionate about this stuff that I didn't do any formal training. I was just so into it that my brain absorbed as much stuff as possible.
I think a lot of the guests that we have on this podcast have come from sort of an engineering degree background. It sort of seems to be the standard path. And I mean, yes, obviously, if you want to start getting really detailed into the analysis of the design of a component and maybe absolutely optimizing it to the nth degree, there's value there for sure. We've now got some tools that are relatively affordable at our disposal, such as finite element analysis through the likes of Fusion, that are also helpful. But at the same time, I think the approach that you've just been talking about is more the one and I don't say that I'm a designer or a fabricator. We'll talk about how shit I am at that soon. But what I kind of believe is that you can do a good job of designing a safe component if you spend enough time in the field seeing similar parts on cars that aren't breaking and falling apart. Okay, they did it this way. It's approximately this size. It's this wall thickness material. They've used this size rod end. If it's fit for purpose for them, then chances are I'm probably going to be okay. Is that sort of a reasonable way of sort of explaining how you at least were starting with that?
Yeah, there's some of that. It's just, I definitely didn't have formal education, but I read stuff, and then also seeing stuff fail.
Yeah.
That's a huge one. I think that gives you more of understanding of building good components and structures and chassis when you see stuff fail, because then it gives you a true understanding of, like, I remember my buddy Garrett Russo, he went out and there was an old company, off-road company called Donahoe, and Craig got in some serious trouble, but nonetheless, the guy built really badass shit, and they had this truggy out and they were testing it in Barstow, and this thing sheared, the chromoly sheared, it rolled at 80, and it did the nastiest worst case scenario. It bucked, and then it landed directly on its roof at like 80, and it sheared the whole A pillar off. It sheared the guy's arm off at the elbow. Garrett saw it. I saw the pictures and stuff. And so you just, all that stuff, especially when stuff fails, because you see other people's shit fail or something, and that registers even deeper because usually you focus on the negative. But it also shows what the metal is doing or what the component's doing more than just something that's staying together, because usually you don't even see the internals.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a saying that I probably haven't applied to this area of motorsport, but I think it probably does hold true that you probably learn more from those failures than you do from the successes, because let's be honest, like, you build a roll cage and put it in a car and it never crashes. The cage never gets tested. How was it going to stand up in a big hit? You never found out. And I mean, that's great. But when you actually see the results of, a massive rollover, then you start to see how that cage is deformed and, hey, did it do its job properly?
Absolutely. The other key element is riding in vehicles. I started riding in a race car when I was 16, and I rode in numerous cars all throughout my life at high speed and people driving dangerously and recklessly. And I think that's like, and I try to get my guys, especially if I have anyone new on my team, I always try to get them to go out in one of our cars or someone else's car that's a capable vehicle, because then when they're building the stuff, they do have an understanding. It does something to your brain where, as a human being, you can kind of start to understand the kinetics of the forces and how things work. And I think that's an incremental part of that too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Anecdotally, in another area of motorsport, I saw a company that made programmable engine computers. So the ECUs that was my bread and butter of tuning. And to start with, this company was basically a bunch of tech heads that knew how to write code and had absolutely zero interest in motorsport. And as a tutor, it totally showed in the product they were producing. And over the years, I won't name the company, but over the years, they transformed, and now they have really passionate enthusiasts on team. And the product just got infinitely better because they understood, they were using the product themselves. They were seeing how it was used, and they were seeing the areas that needed development. So I think probably similar crossover there, albeit obviously very different parts of motorsport. Just coming back to the off-road side of things, you sort of mentioned before that you saw this Prerunner before you knew what a Prerunner was. Is that where you were sort of like, nah, this is me, off-road racing, this is where I'm going with my life, this is sick?
Well, I'm not so much in the off-road racing culture. I'm more in the Prerunner and like building go fast desert trucks.
Sure, okay.
Just like think about a spinoff like a offshore racing boat is an offshore racing boat, but an MTI is essentially, Marine Technology Inc. or whatever that is. That's essentially an offshore racing boat that's got an amazing, beautiful upholstery, super styled out, gorgeous, but it's extremely capable, just like an offshore racing boat. So that's kind of where we're at.
You've taken something that's no longer just refined down to be the only things it needs to be a off-road race truck. You're now turning into something that does all of that, but is also luxury.
Perfect. And also style and design. Like, I get so much more. I appreciate race cars, and all aspects of race cars I appreciate. But when I see a trophy truck, it doesn't do anything for me because I'm like, cool, man, you have just a fiberglass cab on there, and I understand the engineering that goes into this and keeping it minimal and light and fast. But when you're able to see that same kind of thing where it has a sealed cab and it has these proportions, and you can open it and the windows work and you can get on the street and you can drive it on the street, but that it has that pedigree under there where it can do the same things, or at least close to the same things as a unlimited truck. That's awesome to me.
Totally. That kind of begs the question for me then of how are these trucks you're building being used? And where I'm going with this is, to me, I totally understand the difference you've just explained. And again, from what I've seen on your Instagram, these things are an absolute work of art in every way, shape and form. But if someone wants to get into competition, it's probably also heavier and unnecessary. So are these kind of more used just for fun? Or are they actually going to a competition?
No, they're definitely used for fun. If just for like a reference, Eric Connor's F100 Vivian, that's kind of one of the iconic ones that we finished, and it has everything that a trophy truck has. It is lighter than a spec truck. It's 5,800 pounds wet. A lot of the race cars are in the sixes, mid sixes, and it's got adequate power, the wheelbase, the track width, the shock locations, the ratios. It is really like a trophy truck with a cab, and it does incredible stuff, and it's more than capable of running at race pace just like everything else. And that's kind of what we do, is we build these amazing examples of vehicle, like say a Nissan Frontier. We have James's Nissan Frontier, and it's this incredible example of a little Gardner truck, that's got all the underpinnings of a trophy truck in there, but it's got 4 seats and comms and windows and door locks and all the stuff and a windshield. And I think we build them where you could definitely race them and you could possibly be competitive. I think the edge you lose is maybe serviceability, because you are building around or building tin into these things. A lot of the panels are not for serviceability. They're to seal a cabin or just to use doors. And there's a lot of that. So I think your competitive edge would be lost if you had to change some parts out, that failed during the race.
No, that's perfect. I think I just wanted that clarification of what you are building. What's the end result? Where is it actually going to be utilized? So we've got that cleared away.
Definitely full capable race car style cars, but these guys like to go out and they like to do some very similar things that the race trucks would do for probably less of an amount of abuse of time, and then sit back and have a drink or something and go do it again.
No, man, it could be worse. Sounds like a pretty good weekend to me.
Definitely.
Let's rewind, and no one sort of just comes out of the womb with a TIG welder in their hand and just has this God-given gift for fabrication. So I'm interested in learning more about how you developed those specific skills.
Sure. There's 3 angles there. There's the primary is when I was 18. I didn't really know what I was going to do. Well, let's go to like 16, 17. I screwed around with a welder, very basic. My buddy's dad had a Porsche road car shop, very small shop, 1,800 square feet maybe. And he built these Porsches. I forget exactly what model they were. They were a specific model, but they were like his road cars. He'd take them to Willow Springs and stuff. And then at night we'd go over there and like we built a bumper for my Ford Explorer or something, and very minimal, angle grinder, chop saw, MIG welder. Didn't put 2 and 2 together much. I don't know if I even got any skill set from that. 18 years old, didn't really know what I was going to do. My stepdad had a structural and architectural steel shop, very large operation, big cranes, all the heavy duty metal work. That's where I started working, and I started all the old timers there started me from the bottom. So for me, it was moving stuff, taking stuff off of gooseneck trailers with the crane and putting it on horses, and I progressed, and I started grinding handrail. I would grind these slimy MIG welds off of handrail for months straight, and then they'd give me something else, and they really gave me this long drawn out fundamental crash course on metal and understanding it and blending it and welding it and cutting it and punching it and breaking it. And it was not motorsports, but it was big fundamentals. And throughout my time, I've started to progress into the architectural and the stainless side of it, where they did mostly aluminum, all stainless, and it was like nicer stuff. Everything needed to be, like a lot of it got anode. All of the stainless was getting TIG welded. It was sanitary, clean stuff. And so I had a mentor there, Rick, who he worked at San Onofre nuclear power plant before it shut down. And so he came from nuclear and he got me certified. I got LA certified for everything under the sun for welding except stick.
Okay, let's just stop there for a moment, because this
Okay.
is one area that interests me. To a large degree, at least when we get into motorsport fabrication, I can't say that this is the state of play all across the world, but I mean, at least here in New Zealand, I mean, it's completely unregulated. Anyone with a MIG welder or a TIG welder could start a shop and fabricate components, and that doesn't mean that they know what they're doing. You just said about certification. So what does that entail, and what industries do you require certification for? Obviously, nuclear sounds like one. I'd like certified welders working in that industry if at all possible.
So I didn't do nuclear. Rick had a very strong background. So he was a derivative of that. And I say that just to, display his quality control that he expected with stuff when he was teaching it to me. So LA certified requires different stuff. It could be for guys working in the field that are stick welding stuff. A lot of that, for what they would check for with my stuff, is they would check for contamination. They would check for consistency, and then they would, they'd cut the thing, they'd X-ray the stuff like whatever your samples are. There's a term for the samples, I forget what they are, but they would also put it through like a bend test and see at what point, if it does it when it snaps or fails. And that was it. So it was really just the cleanliness. A lot of the like flux core dual shield stuff, we did multiple passes on. So they would check to see if there was slag and stuff in there, and they'd just put it through testing.
Yeah, okay. But to be clear, those certifications aren't required in the US for motorsport fabrication?
No, unfortunately. And it's funny because a lot of the TIG welding, if I would have done manual pulse, like with my foot, TIG welding, and any of the stuff I was doing before, they would have laughed and failed everything. And I've adapted so much of that now, or mostly all I do with chromoly, especially like dual passes and stuff, is a cover pass with my foot.
Okay. Can you explain a little bit more about those terms you just used?
Sure. So what I'm talking about is a lot of the structural stuff, a lot of the plate work too. We run a dual pass. So, I know we wanted to talk about material a little bit, but everything we do is chromoly except for sheet metal, like firewalls and floors and stuff. That would be a cold roll. But all the chromoly, we run a dual pass. So we go in there, and it's really to like mitigate the heat, and it's really to clean stuff up. Sometimes, you can go in with a really hot pass, 250 amps, and be consistent. Do not foot pulse any of that. Be consistent with the rod. So it's very clean and consistent. And then you can do this cover, which adds more meat on the weld, and it also just gets a nice clean hit all the way around it too, which is kind of your beauty hit.
So that second pass is more for the aesthetic, and the first pass is the mechanical strength. Am I picking that up right?
Definitely the root pass is where you get the heavy penetration. I think the second is still not completely aesthetic because you're still spreading material and you're still grabbing both parent materials, with more meat.
Now, one of the things, and again, I'm like right on the limit of, I know enough to be dangerous here, but when we're talking about chromoly, it is a material that needs to be treated with a lot of care when it comes to the welding, because it gets very brittle around the heat affected zone. One of the reasons why you only TIG weld chromoly tube as opposed to MIG welding, because you've got so much more control of the heat. Now, just from what you've explained, I would have thought two passes would have actually been worse in terms of putting more heat into the material than a single pass.
I feel like I am, you talk about like stuff not being regulated. I've kind of gone off what works, and I don't know. Like, I don't know exactly. I know that like a lot of the heat treating, my understanding of a lot of heat treating is kind of doing a lot of the suspension assemblies and the arms and things, and making and kind of normalizing the whole part as one. And it's very rare even chassis get heat treated. So it's really just been a standard that I've grown accustomed to with this dual pass thing. And Back in the 90s, these guys were doing tiny little frail single pass welds, and that was it. And when I see older trucks, I'm like, oh my gosh. And clearly it's held up. It just safety wise to me, when I look at that, I would feel comfortable having more girth of a weld that's grabbing the junction.
Yeah, that makes sense to me as well. I just, again, coming in with just enough knowledge to be dangerous and knowing, the dangers around sort of putting too much heat into chromoly, it's always a concern, or it's always on my mind. You just mentioned heat treating as well. So just again, for those who are sort of not maybe picking up exactly what we're putting down here, one of the differences between, let's say, fabricating a roll cage or an entire tube frame vehicle out of chromoly versus a suspension upright or a suspension arm out of chromoly, obviously very different size components, and that gives you the flexibility to then have a suspension arm or an upright heat treated, and that sort of normalizes all of the stresses, and it gets away from that problem I've just talked about with the heat affected zone. But you can't do that with a chassis, can you?
I think you can heat treat a complete chassis.
Just got to find a big enough oven.
Yeah, Jason Hurd, who's building like some all-wheel drive cars for the Towers family right now, and he's a friend of mine, and he's building our all-wheel drive Prerunner, or at least in the computer. And he's heat treated his stuff. He kind of gets the main structure done, and then he sends it out to heat treating. And then if he needs to weld appendages on there for limit straps or miscellaneous brackets that don't really add to the structure, then he does that afterwards.
Yeah, sure. Okay, we've sort of gone down this rabbit hole about material already, so I think let's carry on. Chromoly, the material we've been talking about so far, why is this the choice of material for your fabrication?
Sure. So a couple things. Chromoly is really clean. It burns clean. It runs clean. I mean, obviously, the opposite end of this would be hot rolled steel, which has terrible mill scale on it. If you want to TIG weld that stuff, good luck, or you're sanding mill scale off with something very abrasive. And it's, you put it in a brake and it flakes off, and it's the lowest end. So chromoly is the highest end of material for structural stuff. The thing is, these cars, especially off-road cars, the way that they get used is essentially like a constant state of abuse.
Yeah.
They are bottoming out the chassis thousands of times, over and over and over, and constant abuse. They're not built to flex. They might move a little bit, but it's not a measurable thing. And you want this stuff to be there for the long haul. I mean, there's another thing where typical, if you're using a stronger material, you can use a thinner material that's lighter. So there's that. But and that's what we do. All of our tabs and stuff, we use discretion on every single bracket and go all the way down to 6.3 or go all the way up to like 3/16 or quarter. But really, it's that longevity thing. There's drawn over mandrel or DOM. I mean, that's like a weird in-between thing, that people use for tubing. But it's just, I want to build the stuff where it either outlasts the person that has it, or it just is a 25-year thing. And chromoly is also so much stronger. And I don't know like tensile strength numbers. I've looked at them before, but the best way I have to put that is it takes a lot less to bend DOM or mild steel. It takes a lot less than it does. Mild steel and DOM bend, and chromoly shears. And the amount that it takes, especially with a proper junction and proper layout and structure or part, the amount that it would take to get that chromoly to fail versus when that DOM or mild steel is going to start just slowly bending, or it crashes and it just bends. It's not even comparable. It's just not a thing. So with the stuff we build, I feel more comfort in sending everything chromoly and just knowing the whole thing's 100% chromoly.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think one of the points you raised there is, and I'm not going to get into tensile strengths because I frankly just don't know them either, but the chromoly material, when we're talking about tube, it is stronger than DOM, and generally how that works out is that you get away with a thinner wall thickness. So you've got the equivalent strength of DOM but with less weight. And that's sort of, here in New Zealand, if we're choosing a material for a roll cage, that's kind of the way up. Do we go chromoly? Do we go DOM? And we're going to get a weight saving, which, I mean, I think on a fairly elaborate cage still isn't a huge amount. I think it's sort of numbers of like 15% may sort of sound about right to me, but again, probably requires a bit of fact checking. So that's sort of where that comes in. Obviously, the downside from the wallet perspective is the material's more expensive. It must be TIG welded instead of MIG welded, and hence the fabrication process is more time consuming as well. So you end up with a superior product that's lighter but more expensive. Is that sort of a good enough way of sort of breaking it down?
Yeah, it's a strength thing too, and longevity. Because a lot of, you got to think with a lot of the off-road cars, weight is not number one priority a lot of times. It's building the thing strong. And just like, for example, the Dakar, that's all 2-inch chromoly, but it's extremely dieted. So it's minimal 120 wall, and then everything else is 095. A lot of it is 065. So it's you can flick it and it tings.
Yeah, so you're choosing the wall thickness based on the load path and what you need, it's going to have to be putting up with.
Exactly.
It's just one other aspect as well that comes into the use of chromoly, and again, minimizing that sort of heat input is the fit up. How what I'm talking about here is the notching the tubes so that they fit together nicely. We don't have sort of glaring gaps. What are you aiming for there in terms of what's your sort of line in the sand of a maximum allowable gap you would have on the fit up between two tubes?
Well, that's a good chance to just be honest. I think that we go for perfect contact. But, there's areas like a lot of times one of the tricky areas is if you're shooting tube work into a interior cabin and you're doing upper tubes and you can't see the notch, you shoot the best, but eighth inch is probably as deep as you want to go on chromoly, or at least what we do.
All right. What we're going to do now is sort of rewind and fill in a few of the blanks. So at what point did you move more into the motorsport fabrication side of things? You sort of talked about the architectural and sort of industrial steel work that you were doing. How did that sort of progress to more motorsport orientated?
Sure. So 18 is when I started all that. 19 or 20, I tooled around with, working on stuff in my garage. It was not a passion for me to do the structural or the architectural stuff, and it was just like the job. I wore steel toe boots and jeans and blown out, clothes every day. And I would come home and I had a air cooled TIG welder in my garage, and I had my Ford Explorer, my same original one I had when I was 16 in there, and I'd redone the cage a couple times in it. So I was dabbling in that stuff on my off time, and it got to a point. Went to college, made it halfway through, dropped out, and then I went back working structural again. And I needed to get back in the desert. I was driving a Z06, and it wasn't practical anymore. And I'm like, man, I wonder if I could trade this thing for a truck, like a Prerunner, and I'll get that. And I ended up trading it straight across, and I got this truck and took it out to the desert 2 times, and I had just a nightmare getting it home the second time because of how bad the death wobble was after I went from dirt to pavement. And that's where it turned, because then I asked my stepdad, I said, hey, Gary, can I work on this on the weekends? I worked 410s, and I said, I'd really like to rebuild this truck. I think I can fix it, and I want to make it better. And I hadn't done my passion stuff for so long that I devoted all my Friday, Saturday, Sunday into fixing this truck up and building it. And that's what I did. I fully rebuilt it. So that's what really got me back into doing like motorsports and off-road, is I just dove in heavy duty with the truck.
Okay, so it's one thing to be sort of working on your own vehicle and learning on it. At what point do you start sort of seeing, hey, there's a business here potentially, maybe there's something I should be pursuing?
I did not have any ambition when I think this is around 25 or 26. I'm 39 now. So I didn't have any ambition like that, where the only thing I did know is when I was working structural steel, I knew something in the back of my head that this just wasn't my path in life. I knew that I was supposed to be doing something greater than this. And I don't mean that with an ego. And I didn't have enough confidence or self-esteem in myself to even stand on that. But I would have those feelings sometimes where I'd just be like, this isn't it. Like, this is, I know that I'm more capable of doing something. I didn't know what it was. I just knew that this is not my life. I'm not supposed to be doing this. So I had a falling out with my stepdad after my mom passed away. And I had gone and got some tie rods bent or something at a race shop, a race co, and every time I go over there to get some help from the guy Jamie, he would give me shit. He would tell me, when are you going to quit building fucking handrails? Or when are you going to build cool shit and stop building staircases? And like, he was just a cool guy. Like he always had shit talking like that. And he's like, you should come work for me. And he was always light. It was just lighthearted. And I had that falling out, and I'm not going to work for my stepdad. So I called up Jamie. I go, hey, is that a real offer? He goes, yeah, come down here and start working for me. And it was my first time ever being in a fab shop or working, and it was kind of typical, I think, like most would be, where the guys all take lunch and there's music playing and everybody's eating from the same place. What do you want? And this and that. And it was pretty light. That was the first week I was there. Maybe the second weekend, I was building some shock mounts. He just threw me right in to the cut, and that's when I started realizing it, because I looked down at what I was working on. I'm like, wow, like I'm getting paid right now to do something that I love to do, and like something cool that I think is cool.
Yeah. Was there a sort of a big learning curve coming from that architectural, industrial fabrication side into motorsport? Or were your skills already pretty finely dialed at that point?
It was definitely some learning curves, just because I was doing so much caveman style big BS, with punches and making holes a 16th bigger always for the bolts, and there wasn't a lot of precision. So I think there was learning to be had with that, and just learning different tooling, because a lot of structural tools are on a greater scale. So working with smaller stuff and just being more refined, that was probably the greatest curve. But with everything,
it must be nice not needing a big ass industrial crane to move everything around, though, when you're working in a motorsport application.
There was there was a lot, because like I mentioned, wearing steel toe boots. I like praise, and I'm so grateful that I can wear shoes, because that was a dark time in my life. I don't ever want to wear boots again. And it just, adapting to it was okay, but I'd always screw up at, like, that's my style, is I mess something up before I get it right. And I just do that with every single step.
Guess that's, again, comes back to you learn from those failures, though, don't you?
Totally. Yeah.
Just coming back one step further again, we sort of talked about your background. Someone today, as an enthusiast, maybe they don't want to get to Morgan Clarke design level, but they want to be able to fabricate good quality parts that look good for their own project cars. Have you got any tips about how people can develop these skills of fabrication?
That's a tough one. I think the easiest way, if you have it, this one would require resources, but I think being able to build your own vehicle is like the greatest way to do it, because you aren't working on someone else's car. You're not working for someone. You don't have to worry about those other things. You just get to naturally evolve your skill set in your own car. But not everybody has that. Not everybody has the ability to have tools, or have their parents get them tools, or have a garage or a shop or anything. So that's just how I kind of came up, and I'm grateful I had that. But for guys, there's schools and there's the fab school and stuff. It's tough, because that's a centralized thing. You'd have to go to Rancho, and you'd have to move your life, and it's tough for a lot of people to do that too. So getting into a shop and just starting somewhere is key,
Yeah. I think that's valid advice. Obviously, if you can have your own project car, that's a great way to start honing and refining those skills. I kind of did much the same, and again, I'll clarify, I am definitely not a great fabricator. What I found frustrating, I had a little, it was a Toyota KP60 Starlet project that I actually ended up giving up on, which was a real shame. But what I sort of found is, from the start of the project, I might have worked on it for maybe 3 years before I sort of moved on and sold it. But it always frustrated me, because obviously your skills progress and you get better over that time. So the parts that I was making later were better than the first bits, and you sort of look back at the first bits and you're like, now I'm gonna have to go and redo that, because that looks like dog shit. I can't have that. So that's kind of a frustration, but I think it's a natural evolution when you have to just be bad at the start and get better. One thing that I found with my own journey in fabrication and why I now employ people who can fabricate or outsource to professionals is I don't think I really enjoyed it, which is probably one of the big drivers. But it comes back to what you were talking about with your sort of artistic design slant. My guess is here I just don't have that design sort of creativity that I think sort of goes hand in hand to making really good fabricators. And you've already kind of agreed that there is a crossover with those two skills, isn't there?
There is for some people. I think other people can just build really typical style, basic race car fabrication, just looking at other people's and putting triangles in places and gussets in places. And
All right. So you can kind of copy what you've already seen out there, do a good job, be a good fabricator, and you don't have to necessarily be super creative.
I think so. I think that a lot of the industry is that. I think that a lot of people, there was precedents that were set very high with factory sponsored programs, especially in the 90s with Ford and Toyota and things such as that. And that was the heyday of engineering and dudes drafting stuff on paper, and they were pushing the limits. Since then, it's just been derivatives of that. It looks like that to me, at least. And everybody drew inspiration. So it's just kind of the same thing over and over. And that's why I stress so hard on functional design.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Moving on, a lot of the fabricators producing products at the level you're doing are sort of really, really heavily leveraging now 3D modeling and 3D scanning. And to the point where a lot of it is designed, a truck will be designed entirely in CAD, the whole tube chassis, and then the individual bars can then be CNC bent, notched. Fixtures can even be designed in SolidWorks or Fusion, and you've got a big old giant Lego kit to assemble. We talked a little bit off camera. It's not quite the direction you go in, is it? Can you give us a sort of an idea of your approach and how and when you're using CAD?
Sure. So there's definitely, I'm familiar with that process too. And we started to work on an F800 project, same thing. We have a really nice fixture table at the shop, get all the posts, assemble the posts, get the e-drawing viewer, look at the thing, put the thing together. It's all numbered, fixtured, snap the tubes in, they're indexed, keyed, all the stuff. A lot of components like that too. We do definitely anything that's like a sub-assembly or a bulkhead assembly or things like that. There's just that time to put that together and then get the accuracy and how many pieces and parts. Doing that stuff on a plasma table or a bandsaw, that's a tough one to make sense, and especially because the accuracy is not going to be there. Yeah, I mean maybe, but I still feel like it's just going to be, even doing a plate structure that has keyways that indexes and snaps together. I mean, if you tried to do that by hand, that's nuts.
So that's an area where CAD is the way.
For sure. So there's that. There's the Range Rover is getting all billet 70-75 upper arms, uprights, lower arms, and rear trailing arms. That's all stuff. One of my greatest defects or tools that's missing is I do not know SolidWorks or any derivative of that, Inventor or whatever. And it's been such a crippling thing for me because even when I design, I do a lot of sketching and I do a lot of the preliminary design work on the parts. And then it has to go to either a class A surfacer because the shapes are dynamic. And then it has to go to a guy doing SolidWorks and he has to put all the details in and then we send it off. So I want to be able to get more into that and be able to learn that. I just feel like it's going to take me years. The other thing is a lot of these cars, and we'll talk about production, but a lot of what we do are one-offs. They're just a bespoke vehicle that this is specific for this car, and that's in the client. And we build it like that for a reason where it's their signature car. It's their one-off car. And putting a chassis together is no problem. Tubes go so fast. I always say the first 80% takes 20% of the time and the last 20% takes 80. It's the same with just drawing tubes, man. That stuff flies. So getting something laced up with tubes is not a tremendous feat where I think that we need to scan stuff and then put it in the computer and then draw it and then have it, CNC processed and lasered and everything. If it's just going to be one.
Yeah, I guess that's going to make a lot more sense if you are going to go and make a production run of 20 or 30 of these, obviously, then yeah, you can repeat the process and it's going to be exactly the same. I have never drawn anything more complex than a sphere pretty much in Fusion, so I'm no expert. Connor's our guy for that, but where I'm going with this is if you want to design a complex vehicle with every single component drawn in CAD before you start building it, I mean, there is going to be a substantial amount of time invested in doing that. Yeah, of course, there's advantages in doing it. You can make sure, for example, that all of the suspension components are going to cycle and nothing's going to hit something that it shouldn't, which is always nice to find before you've actually invested a bunch of time and money in producing a part. But we also, I think the issue now is it's so common to see these high-end renders on Instagram and YouTube of all of these, pre-runners, etc., that sort of becomes the expectation. What we do have to keep in mind is that people have been building these sorts of trucks for decades, and these tools have only really become the norm, more recently. Is that so that fair to say?
It definitely. I mean, same with CNC manufacturing capabilities. That used to be so rare. If you had billet anything, it was a huge deal, and now it's pretty cost effective. Say you were going to do some rear trailing arms like a traditional triangulated four link with shock pockets in them and stuff. That could take you 2 to 3 weeks to weld up. Now add the cost of the laser for that stuff, add the cost of welding in labor, and material and all that, and then think about what that's going to cost if you just machine it. There's serious numbers games that you can play. I think something to add to, though, with like doing stuff by hand and chassis development by hand especially, there's something that you get from doing it one-to-one that you can feel that other humans can associate with in their soul. There's a lot of stuff we still do that I can't get processed. Like we have dynamic compound radiuses that might have 3 different radiuses in one tube that contours the roof line, or we have these notched gussets that just there's not a machine as of right now that can do that stuff, and that's 80% of our stuff.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Just wanted to come back to another point you've made there about the difference between a fabricated suspension arm or something of that nature versus a billet alloy. So you sort of mentioned that it could be weeks of welding essentially on a trailing arm. There's a lot of work goes into it. Is that the sort of decision point you're sort of making now between should we make this part hand fabricated out of chromoly, or does it make more sense financially to go billet CNC machined?
Well, it just pertains to the job, and what the vision of the car is. Sometimes that car, like I think if just another reference back to Vivian, if we were to build this F-100 that looks like an old World War II bomber or now a farm truck, and we had machined, dynamic looking, sculpted parts for the running gear on it, it wouldn't work right.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I always go to that first. What does the car call for? There's some people that get big boners for billet stuff and monkey like shiny kind of thing.
It's definitely become pretty hot right now.
Yeah, and it's heavily saturated in billet parts. It used to be when you had billet parts, it was like really badass because you knew how expensive and rare it was.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of the opposite because it's just like, yeah, billet parts, there you go. It's really in design now.
Yeah. I guess another element sort of coming back to the production side of things there, I guess from my perspective looking in from the outside, if you were going to be making production suspension arms, then CNC would make sense. You do the design work once, you prototype it, it fits, yep, okay, we're good to go now. We can make 10, 100, 1,000. It really doesn't matter. It's just material cost and machine time. But to do 100 hand fabricated arms, I'm guessing you'd probably need an army of fabricators to get that done in a timely fashion.
Yeah, and that's what they used to do with even the upper arms and stuff for lift kits. But definitely, I think the only constraint on that, or the restraint, would be if the part can't be machined because of strength or integrity issues, and that's it, or extreme cost. Like,
Mm. On that note, I guess this is a bit of a grey area. Maybe there isn't a black and white answer to this, but is there a strength benefit one way or another between a properly designed hand fabricated chromoly component, and let's just use suspension arm here as an example, versus billet CNC aluminium?
100%. I mean, that's based on the design, though. And just like you mentioned early in the podcast, there's programs that can test all that and run it through digitally, but that's going to be just 100% rely on design, and also integrity for longevity. Like, I don't know, sometimes with aluminum parts, especially that are using the actual mounting pivots and stuff, is aluminum and it doesn't have an insert or something. I mean, that's going to wear out for sure before a chromoly part would.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's move into one of the projects that I really wanted to talk about, because this thing is wild, and we're going to put some links to some photos of these projects as well, so people can kind of follow along. But your Dakar Prototype, for a start, what's that even mean?
Dakar Prototype is just a concept. So it's not a race car. It's not going to compete in Dakar. It's a Dakar inspired vehicle. A lot of that inspiration draws from the SUV, the smaller vehicle, the rear engine, the independent rear suspension. Like a lot of it is a derivative of what you'd see with like an unlimited class Dakar vehicle or whatever they call it. They might call it a T4 or a T1 or something, but it's really just a concept.
Okay. Is this something that you've built for yourself, or is this commissioned by a client?
This is client.
Okay. And what was the brief, I guess? Where I'm going with this is how much of what's been built is come from your clients? Like, I want it like this, I want this here, I want this body, I want this engine, versus someone who comes to you and goes, hey, I've got a big old bucket of cash here and I want something super cool, make that for me. I'm guessing it's somewhere in between.
Yeah, and I can cover that pretty efficiently. Ryan's the owner of the Dakar Prototype, and Ryan came to me previously to build this big, I call it the big one, but we have a big all-wheel drive Prerunner we're going to build, a mid-engine car with portals and stuff on it. And this was never the plan. We were putting all our coins into the big one. Ryan had this sand truck. We already purchased this underground racing Lamborghini V10. I had it at the shop sitting there. Stage 3 motor, came out of a crashed Huracan. Ryan has this sand truck, and he's like, hey, I want this thing to be cool. Ryan's got really similar taste to me. Like, it's funny because we'll send stuff on Instagram, and usually it's the same thing. Like, throughout the day, I'm like, dude, but
that's got to be super helpful when you share the same sort of aesthetic passions.
Yeah, and he came to me already wanting this very extreme all-wheel drive Prerunner, which I think is still the only one that's being built right now. It's a sealed cab Prerunner all-wheel drive, but he had a sand truck. He wanted to put a steel cab on it. That's like it's our style. We don't want to have this fiberglass body thing. So I had the Range Rover concept. I had a previous engagement where I thought we were going to build it for someone, and it fell through, but it was my dream since 2018 or so to build a Velar, a Range Rover. So I had these renderings that my buddy Peter was doing, and I had him adjust some stuff just so it would be a different version of the previous one. I asked Ryan, I said, what's the wheelbase on that sand truck, man? Because I already had it in my brain. I'm like, I got an idea. So I had him check the wheelbase. I checked out the wheelbase on our car. I was like, look it. And I sent him, I said, look at this. And he goes, yep, we need to do that. And it was the renderings, the digital model of the Velar.
Well, let's sort of just talk about, obviously, that was your concept then originally, but I mean, this doesn't seem like the most obvious choice of vehicle, albeit there's not much Range Rover left, I'm assuming, at this point. But why the Velar as a base to build from?
So I am a huge long roof advocate, wagons, SUVs, just shooting brakes, anything you got, long roof. That's the proportions that draw me in. I love long roof SUV things.
So more SUV than sort of a conventional truck.
Always, always. If I didn't have to build another pickup truck ever again, I would never build a pickup truck. I would always build an SUV. But I saw the thing. I don't remember the year that the Range Rover Velar came out, but I would, just like any person that's into stuff, I'd see it go down the freeway, and it looked to me like it had lines, like the style, the gesture lines. There was so much tension going back to it. It looked like someone sketched it. It had these tail lights and the headlights that drew into the body lines, and this roof that tapered back, and the door height from the rocker to the belt line. It was so tall, and the windows were short, and it looked chopped. And I saw it, and it moved me in a way, because I'm like, man, if that was a Prerunner, it would be insane. You know, if that thing had big tires on it, and it was wide, and it had this full body work, wide body kit on it, and it had, you know, like just big wheel openings, it would be so dramatic. It would look insane.
Just listening to how you explained all of that straight away, it's very obvious your design passion as well as the fabrication. You can sort of just hear that coming through in the way you're explaining that vehicle. Now, at the time, I've never really been in the market for one, but I can assume that they're a pretty expensive SUV. How do you go about this project? I mean, I can't imagine there's going to be a whole bunch of sort of, I don't know, Range Rover Velars that are being sold off cheap because the engine and transmission fell apart or something of that nature. Do you literally just have to go into the dealership, buy one, stick a price, and then rip out all of the good stuff that makes them so expensive just so you've got a body?
We had to do a very tedious dance on Copart, which is like our auction, our dealer auto wholesale. So you have to have a dealer license. And so we went on Copart and just found one with a collision, but you don't want to get one with a salvage title. So we found one. I'm like, and Ryan and I both searched, and we're like, dude, I put like 3 people on searching Copart for weeks. We just weighed out what was best, but you know, something that we knew the front end didn't matter. So it could have a full front end collision as long as it just had that rear hatch and the rear shell and all the door jambs and stuff were solid. And if we can get good doors, we're good, but none of the front mattered. So that's what we got. We just got a front end collision, and it was relatively inexpensive.
Yeah, perfect. I guess then you can just buy the panels that were damaged at the front because you're not bolting them to the factory chassis anymore.
You won't even have those panels because it'll all be dry carbon bodywork. So it's really just that we got a fresh grill and fresh headlamps, and we're off to the races.
Yeah, okay. All right, so what are the other sort of drivers behind this? Obviously, you've got no rule book to work to. I don't know, sometimes I kind of find that's a blessing and a curse. When you have a fairly defined set of rules, that drives the direction. When you can literally do anything because you're starting with a clean sheet of paper, I find it's easy to get bogged down in sort of what I call analysis paralysis. You know, you spend so long looking at different iterations. Oh, I could do this, we could do this. You never actually get started and get the project moving.
Well, we had some good constraints from the start because, like I said, we wanted to convert the sand truck he had into, which the sand truck was a twin turbo LS. It was 1,200 horsepower to the wheels, sequential gearbox, and we wanted to convert it to this Range Rover. When I got the car, nothing was good on it except the bulkhead for the front and rear suspension assemblies. And that was it. We had the Lambo engine sitting. We were going to originally just put the twin turbo LS in there. He goes, hey, what if we put the V10 for the big truck into the sand truck, or the Range Rover, and we'll get a V12 for the big truck. So I'm like, that's cool. I've measured everything. So we knew that the car was going to be IRS. We knew that it was going to be rear engine. We knew it was going to have CVs in the back. We knew it was going to use the front suspension assembly off the sand truck. So that gave us a good premise to start with.
In terms of the suspension design, what sort of the pros and cons, I guess, of independent versus live axle? If we look at a road race application, obviously the live axle is a significant amount of weight. That's unsprung weight. that's a negative effect on your suspension's ability to move quickly and follow undulations in the racetrack. In an off-road application, you sort of see just as many designs using independent as live. Is the weight issue of a live axle as critical?
Usually the live axle is, at least for my perspective, it's the more common triangulated four-link with a live axle. And it comes down to primitive, this is strong. The packaging is usually motor in the front, or like the all-wheel drives are mid-engine, kind of with a backwards motor and it's still sending a drive shaft back there. So the packaging is like that. A lot of trucks like weight in the back, so they can put a fuel cell back behind there, and wheel travel. There's a lot more wheel travel you get from a high-end four-link live axle. The IRS is really like an unlimited buggy, and they're a much more aggressive driving vehicle. It's a lot more of a visceral experience where a truck can really just start going through big holes and be like a couch.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. In terms of the sort of the suspension kinematics or geometry, basically the way the alignment changes. I mean, obviously with a live axle, as the axle in its entirety moves up and down, you're getting no camber change. It's not like that with independent suspension. Again, now, is the ability to have sort of a variable camber curve or design it to have toe change through suspension travel, camber change through suspension travel, is this a feature or a flaw with independent suspension when you're looking at so much travel?
You can set camber up in that thing, but it's a fixed pivot, so it's really just a trailing arm swinging. So you can kind of kick the pivot in and get more camber, and it's just going to be what it is. And I think that for like the duty, especially being in a smaller car, something with 37-inch tires, something that can be road going, like I would prefer that over a live axle. The tracking and the cornering and the grip out of that is going to be significantly better than a live axle.
Okay, fair. I just wanted to take a moment out of our interview and talk about a package of courses that we've put together that I think are going to be perfect for those with an interest in motorsport fabrication. And while I can't say that you're going to take these courses and instantly start building vehicles at the level that Morgan's doing, everyone has to start somewhere, and in my opinion, this is the best place to get started. Our fabrication starter package is valued at $299, and you can use the coupon code MCD for Morgan Clarke Design. That's MCD100 to get $100 off, bringing it down to just $199. This package includes our Motorsport Fabrication Fundamentals course, which, as its name implies, will teach you the fundamentals of motorsport fabrication. You'll learn about the different welding techniques used in fabrication, such as MIG welding and TIG welding. You'll learn about tube bending, notching. You'll learn how to use dimple dies. These are used to both improve the aesthetics of your finished product as well as adding strength to thin sheet metal. You'll also learn what sort of tools you're going to need to fabricate your own parts, and you might be surprised to find out that you actually don't need to start out by spending tens of thousands or even thousands of dollars. You can start with very basic tools, some of which you've probably already got, and then slowly build up on this tool set over time as you want to branch out and start fabricating more specific and advanced projects. Then we're also including our practical TIG welding course, which is valued at $199 on its own. Now, TIG welding and motorsport fabrication really go hand in hand. This is one of the most advanced and most controllable methods of welding components together, giving a really nice high quality finished welds with a huge amount of strength. However, TIG welding is relatively complex, and if you don't know the fundamentals of TIG welding as well as how to correctly set up your TIG machine for different materials, then you're going to really struggle to get finished results that resemble anything like what Morgan's producing. This course will teach you all of that and more. You'll learn a step-by-step process to setting up your TIG machine and then welding irrespective of the material, and we include a quick cheat sheet that will help you get your machine set up for different materials in no time. Once you've gone through the body of the course, we then move into a library of worked examples, which is where you can watch our step-by-step process being applied on a variety of real-world fabrication projects using different materials to really drive in the lessons learned in the body of the course and expand your knowledge on a wider range of different fabrication welding tasks. This package also includes 24 months of gold membership, which gives you access to our live weekly webinars, access to our archive of webinars. We've got over 350 hours of content in there. It's an absolute goldmine. And you'll also get access to our private members only online forum, which is the best place to ask your specific fabrication questions. Total package is normally valued at $299 US. As I mentioned, you can use the coupon code MCD100. That'll bring it down to just $199 US. You can still break that payment down into as many as 8 individual weekly payments, and even using that coupon code, you are still protected with our 60-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. So there is zero risk giving the ultimate motorsport education package a test drive. Now let's get back to our interview with Morgan. I got to dive into this Lamborghini V10 as well. You mentioned underground racing, which are pretty synonymous for twin turbo conversions. Is it safe to assume that this is a twin turbo V10?
So it's, like I said, it came out of a Huracan. It was just like front collision, so it didn't really matter. It's a stage 3 underground. The Huracan was doing 16 and change all-wheel horsepower to the wheels. What we did now is we work with Precision Turbo. They're familiar with the underground engines. They bumped up our turbos to Gen 3 68 millimeters. So it's supposed to be 2,000 at the wheel.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like it's probably enough. Is there kind of a limit to how much you can actually get to the ground in an off-road application though? I mean, I would have thought that traction is going to be a bit of a problem, but if you're stepping up from 1200 and with a twin turbo LS to now 1600 and potentially 2000, maybe I'm wrong.
I think there's definitely going to be hurdles to get over with that. Running Motec for engine management, I think we can run stability control and traction control. And if we can get that dialed in properly, it's just, the other thing you got to consider too is it's going to be an extreme athlete of a vehicle, but really going to shine in the dunes. So if you're running a paddle tire in the back, like we have these extreme nasty paddle tires, they're 12 scoop tires, 37s, it's nonstop grip. So the power delivery is going to be amazing in it, especially in the sand. Obviously, you're going to smoke the shit out of the tires if you're just weeding it on the street or something.
Yeah, totally. But that's kind of fun too. I remember years and years ago, we did a trip to Dubai, and we were based out of a business there called Sub-Zero, and they built a lot of sand drag cars. And yeah, now that you mention that, the same thing. I think they were at the time was sort of their big boy truck was 1700 at the wheels or something. But yeah, big paddles on it. I guess you got a lot of grip.
Yeah, and I think it's better to have it than not have it. If we need to detune it, we can. It's still going to be a sub 4,500 pound car, so I don't know what the power to weight on that is. It'll be fast, but I don't think it's going to be, where the car's 1,500 pounds and it's got 2,000 at the wheels.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, probably not sort of likely to be running sixes on the quarter anytime soon. In terms of detuning it though, one of the things, if you're aiming for a package that's going to produce 2,000 horsepower, granted the Lamborghini V10 5.2 litres, you've got a fair bit of capacity on your side. So, power to that capacity is not actually as insane as it might sound. Where I'm going with this though, turbos sized to support 2,000 horsepower from that engine are going to be very different to, say, turbos that you would size for 1,200 to 1,500 horsepower. The end result is that you're going to have a lazier engine that's not going to come on boost until higher in the rev range. And the question around this is, how important is the power band in this type of vehicle? I would have thought that low-end torque was probably quite important, but again, maybe I'm just off the mark here.
Well, I trusted Precision with that. I dealt with their engineers there, and I was shooting bigger. I was trying to get stuff in the 70s and they said the 68s, like their Gen 3, will spool low. They said that that's the same thing they stressed. They said you need to, with an off-road application like this, you need the low-end torque. 68s are going to give that to you. Anything bigger than that is going to be tremendous, boost thing where there's turbo lag.
Yeah, the other thing, I've already sort of talked about the available traction with these paddles on, but something that's really easy for people to miss is when you start getting these bigger turbos that are lazier to come on. So they come on later in the rev range, and when they come on, it's like a light switch, and you get such a massive jump in torque over such a short sort of increase in RPM that can be enough to sort of invoke wheel spin. So yeah, that sounds counterintuitive, but it is something that I try and keep in mind when I'm sort of choosing a turbo or trying to figure out what my power delivery is going to look like.
Totally.
Let's talk about the rest of the drivetrain. So what have you got in there? Because even then, sort of 2,000 horsepower, that's going to be putting a lot of strain on drivetrain componentry.
Totally. So it's running just a mid-board hub. That's big CVs, big axles, but the gearbox it's a Albin's. It's a Gen 3 synchro mesh. It's a H pattern gearbox with a clutch. We upgraded the clutch size to like a GM style flywheel and clutch with like a big billet bell housing. But we wanted to keep it a manual car. It had a sequential before, and it's really more of a driving experience thing. It's not so much needing to no lift shift and do all that. It's being able to row through the power in the gears and downshift and streetability. It's going to be driven on the street a lot. It just manual cars there's something so connected about a manual car, and I think with the way the architecture of this thing is set up, it calls for having a 3-pedal car.
Yeah, no, I couldn't disagree with any of that. Albins, as I understand it as well, have quite a good reputation in that market. They make some gearboxes and transaxles, as I understand it, specifically sort of for the off-road market. You mentioned synchro mesh, so I won't go too far down in the weeds here. Generally, when we're talking about motorsport gearboxes, it'll be a dog engagement gearbox. Synchro mesh is what we'd find in a factory manual transmission car. Means that the gear shifts are nice and easy for the driver. Synchronizes the gear speeds, hence the name, but they're relatively slow, which is why for motorsport, dog engagement is the general go-to, very quick. And as you mentioned before as well, if you've got an ignition cut or something like that, you don't need to actually use the clutch or lift off the throttle for the shift. The driver behind going with the synchro mesh boxes is sort of again based around the fact that this is going to be street driven. They're a lot nicer on the street than a dog box. I can definitely attest to that.
Yeah, if you've driven a sequential on the street, I mean, it's cool for a little bit, but it sounds like stuff's breaking all the time, and it's just having to downshift and just get back to one, and it's a driving experience. It's the same thing with the interior. It's a sealed cabin. It's going to be plush, all Alcantara. Like you want that, and it's just, I think the power is going to be brutal like that, where you can just get in the gears and just get after it. It doesn't have to get through the gears fast. It just needs to be enjoyable.
No, for sure. On that note as well, another part that really plays into the, livability of a car on the street. It's not just whether it's dog engagement or synchro mesh, but straight cut versus helical cut gears. Again, in a motorsport gearbox, quite often, well, more often than not, they seem to be straight cut, which creates a really, really noticeable whine for anyone who hasn't driven a car with a straight cut gearbox. And that can be dog engagement or synchro mesh. The two are not mutually sort of exclusive. Yeah, which way did you go with that, or is this just driven by what Albins actually offer?
Yeah, it's just their package, but it's straight cut synchro mesh, so you'll still get the whine.
Okay, so it is going to be a bit whiny.
That's the best.
Yeah, I mean, some people love it. I guess it comes down to, again, what you were talking about. The sequential gearbox on the street's great for the first 15 minutes, and then when you're driving it through stop-start traffic, it kind of gets a little bit tedious. And I think if you're on a long trip with a straight cut gearbox and it's sort of in top gear and whining away, and that can wear thin as well, I think. But up to the individual, of course.
Yeah, totally.
Now, you've mentioned Motec electronics. Can you, I mean, obviously we're getting a little bit away from your core skill set of fabrication here, but what's the rest of the electronics in the car?
So the electronics is a thing, a lot of cars and even our big pre-runners, you just have a guy build a nice mil spec harness, custom harness for the car, Motec engine management, PDMs, super simple. I mean, I know it's complicated, but it's simple for a guy like that. This is something where we want to have all of the factory integration still there, at least with like your running lights, your headlights, highs, lows, blinkers, but also have all the instrument panel work, all the telemetry in the gauge cluster, the infotainment, the air conditioning, key fob start, push button start, all that requires its own Motec. And so there'll be two systems. There'll be the one that runs all the Range Rover, and then there'll be the one that runs all the engine management, and then they'll bridge each other.
Yeah, okay. So just outwork that to people that you've been working with for ages who just get the job done at a level that suits the quality of your builds, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and we don't do wiring in house unless it's like something very general, like putting auxiliary lights on a switch or something. That's just an extensive one, and I don't have a place yet. I don't know if we're going to have to ship this thing across the states, and I don't know. It's going to have to be more than just an off-road guy that does this. It needs to be an electrical engineer.
Yeah, I could imagine there'd be a fair bit going on. But I also know there's plenty of people over there that are more than up to the task.
Totally.
Now, just one of the standout features for me, just sort of looking at this build on your Instagram, has been a lot of the tin work, particularly around the rear wheel arches and the dampers. Again, we'll link to some photos because it's a little hard to explain, but I mean, these are some really complex parts, sort of going in all sorts of different directions. How do you sort of design a component like that and then actually manufacture it?
Well, the way I look at putting I like to call them wins. I like to engineer the wins in places that are not consumable areas. The rear door openings and all the rear chassis enclosure panels, that's stuff that's not, if you rolled or crashed, it would be really hard to even damage that. So to put extra resources into those areas that end up being extreme focal points of the car makes sense to me. What we do, just like everything, is we establish all the foundation and the fundamentals of what we need for things to function. Same with the shock mounts. We do those shock mounts first, and it's just a vision. The rear door openings you're talking about have kind of some portal windows, beveled portal windows. They're three-dimensional.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was getting at. The words weren't coming to me at the time, but these three-dimensional shapes that you're sort of forming out of what obviously starts life as a flat piece of steel, that sort of blows my mind.
So we just, that was a very careful area because there's a 1/4 inch partition of transparent material in there. All that was to, like, I had that idea. I don't want to build this thing like a race car where it's closed off and it's just a 2-seater and there's a back wall and it's just, a little cockpit. I wanted to have light sources coming in and it feel open and free. And especially if it's 2,000 wheel horsepower, like that can scare you. And you don't need to even be sitting in something that's just a little machine like a death rocket. So I think having a spatial presence where there's light coming in and you can look back and you can see the shocks and someone can open the door and they can kind of appreciate it as like an art piece and they can see through and they can see the carbon seats and all that. So it's just really knowing that you want windows, it's like form follows function. I knew that we want the functionality of windows in there. And then it's kind of figuring out, like, we base style and design off what's already there. So the shock mounts are already there. So it's really flowing with what the car wants and what the shapes want. And all that stuff is just really traditional kind of sheet metal. I mean, it looks complex and really formed, but it's really just, a sheet and a cutout and a bevel, and it's welded and blended, and it's a pretty nice, easy process if you have a plan.
Sure. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I think you also kind of answered one of my other questions, because when I looked at that, it's so intricate and I can kind of guess at the hours that would go into it. My question was going to be, so, what happens when it gets damaged and you've got to make another one? But you kind of nicely answered that. You've chosen the areas where the chance of damage is going to be much reduced. On that note, though, I wonder how you feel about your work of art that you've poured countless hours in, actually then going out and being used how it was designed and being beaten up in the desert. And, that's going to come with, stone chips and wear and tear, and it's no longer going to look like it's brand new. How do you sort of reconcile that yourself? Is that an issue for you?
One thing I want to just note so we can talk about it is production of these cars. Let's just touch back on it. So I love that. I think especially like if you're building functional machinery, the worst thing that someone can do or a client can do for me is to not use the shit out of it. If they don't drive the piss out of it, then how good is that for my company or my branding or the legacy of the vehicles? The absolute best thing is to have these guys go out and use them like they're supposed to be used. And we do the best we can to powder coat stuff and, make proper of everything where it's going to last. But I think that you can pull it off. Like my buddy RJ, he has this Black Ranger that for a while people were like, "Is that thing's never going to see the dirt and this and that?" And I've been in that Ranger doing 100 plus for a long time in the desert with it, and all the rock chips and stuff. It's okay. The real damage comes from racing. If you were to put that in a race, that's where it's like non-negotiable abuse because you're trying to win.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose you take that competitive element out of it and you're just doing it for fun. Yeah, your chances of ripping a corner off it are probably far reduced, although not necessarily zero. I agree with you what you're saying as well. While you were talking there, I was just sort of thinking, I had this conversation. I've got a 9-year-old boy and he's into mountain biking. So we go mountain biking all the time. And it was last year, he got a new Common Cell full suspension mountain bike for his birthday, and a couple of rides in, he has a crash and there's a scratch on it. He sort of gets himself upset. I'm like, mate, you got to understand that this is a mountain bike. It's made for riding. You're going to crash it. It's going to get rock chips. It's going to get scratched, but it's a mountain bike. It is not a piece of art. And I think that's really important. It sort of sounds like that crosses over to how you feel about these cars you're building as well.
Totally. And do you ever see like a American Le Mans or a GT3 car? You ever see them when they're just finished racing?
Oh yeah. They don't look anything like they do at the start.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that adds so much character to the cars. I'd much rather, any vehicle, even a road car. I appreciate the novelty of it being show finish, but I appreciate more going and seeing it and looking closely and going, "Oh, dude, look at the belly pan. Oh my gosh. Oh, whoa, look at is that tread all in the back? Like what, like I think that is so mumuch more potent and like connected knowing that car is being used. Even if it's leaking a little bit out of something, like that's awesome.
Yeah, my business partner Ben and I have got a 1966 Chev C10, which is I think probably actually the favourite car in the whole fleet. I mean, it's probably lucky if it makes 150 horsepower, but it's absolutely sacked on its ass, and it looks cool. And it's a bit rough. It's got a patina paint job. The benefit with it is we both have dogs, so you can chuck the dog in the tray or inside. You can go take a load of shit to the dump, and it doesn't matter if it gets scratched because that kind of that's the whole aesthetic. As opposed to like if that thing was like pristine show car, I'd kind of be scared to use it a little bit. The dog probably wouldn't be going in the back of it. So I think there's something to be said for that. Something that's actually like not perfect and is genuinely just used. All right. I want to talk about your business because we've sort of talked around the edges of what Morgan Clarke Design is. Can we sort of go back there and get a sense of, how you got to the point it's at now? And, what is a sense of the scale size of the business at the moment?
How I got here, I worked as a fabricator for shops. I floated around. I always had issues with staying somewhere for a consistent amount of time. I struggled with addiction and alcoholism often. My mom passed away. That was a big part of my story. She died from cancer. She kind of withered away, and I watched her suffer. And then I just kind of just gave up on trying for a long time. And that doesn't mean that I didn't do anything, but I just wasn't being the best person I could be every day. And with that, I was showing up, and I was the talent. I was always the talented fabricator, but I was also always that guy that was flaky, that would be late almost every day, would not show up some days and not even call, like not a good version of myself. And I did that for a bit, and I floated around for, different shops, and I was doing good work. It just that those are the frustrating employees, because those guys that are really good, but they're not worth a shit because they can't show up and they can't be consistent. And that was me for a long time.
How did you turn that around?
Well, that's, like my mom used to say, crisis is change trying to take place. When I was at my last shop working for someone, the last place I did work for someone, that I had a pretty big chip on my shoulder already working for him. And there was things that were said, and a lot of instances where I told myself I'm never working for someone ever again. I don't know what's going to happen, but no matter whatever happens from this, I'm never working for someone again. And I didn't have any money. I didn't have any tools. I didn't have any place even thinking about having my own business. People used to tell me all the time, Morgan, you should have your own shop. You should have your own business. And I couldn't get out of my own way. And I couldn't even think about those things because I was sabotaging myself. I had a falling out there at some point. It was 2019. I had a falling out there, and it was the biggest, greatest blessing in disguise, because I couldn't have kicked my own ass into gear unless I got let go like that. And it was the first day of first grade for my son in a new school. I just moved them out to where I was working. I was living in this house by myself while my kid was going to school in our old town, and just moved them in, and we just got back, and it was after Labor Day weekend, and I got back and we had no money in the bank. We were going paycheck to paycheck, and I got let go, and I was so angry. I was so pissed, but I was shaking, and I couldn't figure out what to do at first. And I hopped on the phone and I told myself, that happened on Tuesday. I told myself by Thursday, I'm going to figure this out. And I talked to everybody, and it trickled into me going up and doing some work at another shop. And Evan was the owner of the shop, and he gave me the opportunity to kind of bring some projects in. And that's where it started.
Okay. It's an interesting just to hear a different perspective on how someone's got to where they've got to, particularly battling those sort of demons. I mean, a lot of people will never come back from that. So I do find it interesting, but it sounds like it was sort of an enforced path to clean your life up, essentially.
Like I said, it was a crisis, because I didn't know what to do. We didn't have any money. Like, I'm freaking out. And I was valued. I was a valuable player for a fabricator. So I talked to all the big companies the next day. Everybody was giving me job offers and all that. But I'm like, dude, I told myself I'm not going to work for, anybody else ever again. And it cold turkeyed drugs and alcohol right off the bat. Boom. Because I'm like, I got to survive. And then I ran with that so heavy, because it was like I had fears that if I ever went back, I'd lose everything that I'm building right now and lose what I'm doing on my own. And it just it trickled into being able to, like, I had a very nice transition, because I was doing work at Evan's shop, and I was bringing clients in, and I was using his tools, and he was being, he was letting me do that, which is huge. And then it got so busy and so big. He's like, dude, maybe you can rent some space next door to me in the building or something. He's like, but this is like getting out of control. So I transferred next door, and then I still didn't have a lot of tools. I had like 2 welders and a sheet metal breaker or something. And I had minimal stuff. So I was going next door and using this stuff all the time. And then, one piece at a time, I would buy tooling. And so I had a really smooth transition where it wasn't like just dropped on my ass. And then oh my gosh, I need tools.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously a very, very difficult financial step for someone to set up a business completely from scratch. So the ability to do that piecemeal, definitely going to be making a huge difference. I kind of have this rule, because no matter where you're at in life and how many tools you've got in your tool shop, your workshop, there's always going to be something you don't have. And occasionally we'll find they're like down the road at a mate's workshop, like, hey, can I borrow such and such? But my sort of rule for that is, if I have to borrow it twice, I need to buy one. Not everyone needs every single tool. There's going to be something you'll use one time, and hey, that's probably just fine. And it's a goes backwards and forwards as well. They borrow heaps of stuff off us.
Yeah, I totally agree. I probably let that go like 4 or 5 times, and then I need to do something, or when I'm feeling like, hey man, I probably shouldn't be borrowing this again. That's where it'll get me. It's another thing too, because I've never had any help. I never that was the most help I had, but I've never had like an investor. I've never had a loan. I've never had any kind of working capital ever to start with. It's always been it's been a slow struggle too, because you're depending on clients paying their bills to have capital.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right, so I think we've got a sense of that. How the business is today, have you got staff? What size is your facility? And we haven't even talked about where you're located.
Sure. So I'm in Simi Valley, California. That's just north of Los Angeles, just enough to be out of the shit. So we're there. I'm just there by kind of by default. 2,800 square feet, small space. We do have a mutual, it's out of a 14,000 square foot building. So we have like a mill and a lathe that's kind of a shared area. 2 employees full time that are my fabricators. And then I have my wife does most of our orders and stuff at home and a lot of our finances. And then I have Joey who does all our YouTube stuff. And then I have another guy, Cody, who's doing all of our website and, designing stuff for the future.
Okay. A question I always ask people who have started their own automotive businesses because they're good at something, fabrication, obviously, in your case. At this point, what percentage of your week is spent now actually on the tools doing fabrication? The point I'm getting at here is, people fall into business without realizing what that means, and all of a sudden they find that between ordering parts and invoicing and talking to customers and quoting jobs and the general crap that goes along with running a successful business, all of a sudden you're spending maybe like at best 50% of your time doing the thing that you love doing. So I'm interested, how's that working for you?
I'm pretty boots on the ground still. So my guys, like what we build, I don't just let them go free on stuff. It's never something where I go, hey, build this bumper, build this roll cage, build this shock mount. Everything is extremely design intensive and involved with me. So I kind of make my rounds. I have a project I'm working on. I usually do a lot of the higher end specialty sheet metal work that requires like one-to-one design. I can't really like tell them how to do it because I have to feel it and flow with it. And so I kind of walk around when they need me or they pull me off, and I'm really good at kind of stopping what I'm doing and getting back on it when I come back. And I do most of that. I'm there 10 to 12 hours, at least 5 days a week. And then I don't have an office there. So like I'm in my office right now. Invoicing, I've just kind of figured out, I try to stay ahead of it. I used to invoice every week, and it got tremendous doing that because of the hour logs and timesheets and material. And now I try to just work off of like a deposit or something where I can get a couple weeks of time before I need to figure it out again. I've tried different things, and it's still a learning curve. Just like you said, a lot of these guys, including myself, are talented, and they end up working at shops and they finally do their own thing. And the most difficult thing 100% is learning business and running a business. It ties in also with emotions. When you're passionate and you're a builder, learning how to make decisions that are not based on emotion or passion and based on business is a huge thing that coincides with a lot of these decisions. But I'm working with my hands every day.
Oh, I still struggle with that, and sometimes I find myself doing things because I wanted to do the thing. It was the shiny new object syndrome, essentially. And then sort of halfway through it, I'm thinking, yeah, this was a really bad idea. This is definitely not the highest and best use of my time, and it is not doing anything to drive the business forward. So, I still fall into that trap regularly. I totally get what you're saying.
Sure.
Sometimes I think as well, the strength of the business and the success of the business is built equally on the jobs that you turn down as it is on the jobs that you do take on that go really well. I'm interested to get maybe your take on how you price these jobs, because I see how intricate they are. I can only imagine the hours that go into them and the materials. Are you sort of doing a reasonable job of estimating the finished price ahead of time, or are you fortunate enough to have clients with deep enough pockets that, within reason, it is what it is and they pay the bill?
So that corresponds with running business and having experience. Every person, I think, no matter how deep their pockets are, they want to know numbers. Nobody wants to get hit with a just an invoice after invoice after limited, or just these invoices just keep coming. I think even if it's something, a job that costs $1 million, they still just want to know chunks and when you're going to need it, and like just people want to know numbers. And I've learned that over time. The other thing that I've learned is just you have to get through a type of, like, if I take on a trophy, like a spec trophy truck project. We did this aero spec trophy truck that's all aerodynamic, and if it's something you haven't done before, no matter what, it is like absurd to quote it, because you're always going to be 2 to 3 times higher than what you quote. And that's the lessons I've learned too. So I think you have to do this stuff for a bit before you can legitimately give quotes. Yeah. So most of my stuff, I get a rough number. I said, this thing's going to be 450K or something, and this could be this could be an option, this could be an option. I don't, unless it's something where it's a smaller job, and I can give an estimate. It's going to be this, and if it goes under or over, then we get the hours. But it varies per project for sure. It's one of those things I don't think we get every hour, but I try to get my wins where I know that I don't need to put so much emphasis on a part or a piece.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And coming back as well to the sort of unlimited budget, I don't really think that exists. There might be a couple of unicorn customers out there, but I mean, most people who have made enough money in their life to be engaging your services to build a 500,000, maybe $1 million truck probably are also counting their pennies along the way and aren't just going to be frivolous with their cash. So yeah, I think the unicorns are probably very few and far between. All right, Morgan, I think you've been really generous with your time, so we will move towards wrapping this thing up. And at the end of all of our podcasts, we've got the same 3 questions we ask each of our guests. And the first of those is, what's next and in the future for you? So you personally and the business, either or?
Sure. Well, projects-wise, that's why I want to talk about the Dakar. That's one of my vehicles that I do want to build. I want to build 7 of those total.
You did mention, we will come back because you said production. So this is actually a prototype for a production vehicle.
Exactly. And that's why I call it the prototype. I really believe in this car. I think that the performance we're going to get out of this thing is going to be extreme and hyper for anything that's ever been an off-road car like this. I think the demand for it, especially in Dubai and Qatar and areas like that where they have their sand dunes, it's going to be huge. So we'll reverse engineer that whole car. We'll splash all the aluminum with carbon, get molds off of it. And I've thought about that because you kind of did ask about production, and that's one that I am going to take a dip into production with. The next thing is this all-wheel drive truck. And then the big one that I have on the back burner is our Blackbird project. And that would be the most iconic thing that we will produce to date is going to be the Blackbird.
Okay. Exciting times.
And then the business, we're planning on a move soon. That place has been a really nice transitionary spot for us. But the end goal is to have a ranch and just have a private facility, nice big building, 8,000 square feet, where we can have a creative space.
And when you say ranch, you're talking about having enough land that you can actually go straight out of the workshop and test.
I don't know if we'd run the cars. I mean, we could just test them, but it'll be in a canyon or something, 20 to 30 acres. So there'll be horses and stuff. I'd still probably transport the cars where we can drive them really fast.
No, that's fair. It sounds like some exciting plans in the future. We'll be keeping an eye on your Instagram with a lot of interest. Next question. Is there any advice you'd give to a younger version of yourself to help reach where you are today in your career faster? I mean, I think we've already talked about you've had quite a non-conventional trip to this point. But any sort of pearls of wisdom you could give us there?
I would just apply focus and stuff. When I was in my young 20s, I didn't have any drive or goal or dream. And I think the first step you can take towards going towards a dream, even if it's not the one you end up in, you just need to take a step when you're younger, whatever that is. Find something that is a dream to you or as a goal or something you want to do, and just try it. Just don't be stagnant. Don't just fuck around. Don't party. Don't just go out with your friends. Like, do something, because I think it goes so fast in your 20s. By the time you know it, you're 30 or you're 35 and you're like, dude, what did I do? And I think if you're a passionate person, it's easy to get distracted and it's easy to get stuck in little holes. And it's just finding, it doesn't have to be your end game, but I think just taking steps to focus on something and to go attack that. And even if that just opens a door for you to take a different trajectory to go do something else, it's just a matter of just get off your ass and don't slip, just go. That would be the best thing to do.
If I just sort of bring that advice back to what you've told us today so far, is it that point in time where you were let go and that you're at your lowest and you had no money? Is that the point that was where the light switch was flicked for you, and you're obviously now very driven and very passionate? And it sounds like from what you've told us, prior to that point, you were sort of going through the motions. You're a good fabricator, but you were turning up late, missing days, etc. Am I sort of picking that up right, or have I missed something there? Is there another point that sort of passion and drive developed in you?
That's a good question. And you talking about my lowest, I've been at rock bottom 1,000 times, different ways. It's, I've been mentally and spiritually bankrupt a ton of times in my life, and that was just one of them. But really, it was about 2.5 years ago is when I made a huge transformation of, I had some awakening where I looked at myself and I'm like, man, I'm 37. Is this who I want to be? Is this how I want to lay in my deathbed and be? Is this how I want to see myself? Is this someone that I'm proud of? Is this someone that my kids are proud of? Is this someone my wife is proud of? Am I being the person that I want to be when I die? Like, something hit me and I'm like, I have maybe half of my life left. And that's where I started changing everything, where I'm like, I don't want to do anything that's not cohesive to me being the most optimal version of myself. And that was it, where things changed. So 2.5 years ago was that big, like, monumental flip where I just started being relentless with stuff.
Well, I mean, the effect of that shows. So, congratulations to everything you've achieved, and also getting past those low points. That is no joke. And I take my hat off to you.
Thank you.
All right, our last question for today, Morgan. If people want to follow you, and I highly recommend that they do so, where are they best to go to? What are your social media accounts?
Instagram, you could search MCD1, the number 1, or Morgan Clarke Design 1. It's the same with YouTube. And that's the thing. If anybody, chooses to follow me or, hasn't seen our stuff, I'm always here to help and be of service. Whether that's like, if you're having a hard time, if you need direction in your life, if you need guidance, like, I'm available. I might have a big following, but I make a serious effort to connect with anybody who has messages for me or wants to reach out to me, and to be of service to anyone. So yeah, MCD1, Morgan Clarke Design 1.
Amazing. And as always, those links will be in the show notes to make it easy for people to find. Look, Morgan, it's been a real pleasure to learn about your backstory, and the product you're producing is absolute world class. So congratulations on everything you're doing, and I look forward to seeing all of these projects that you've just talked about come to fruition in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. Maybe we can hop back on when I'm done with this thing, and talk about where we're at.
Absolutely. Would love to reconnect and see how it's all come together. Yeah, thanks again.
Right on, dude. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of Tuned In with Morgan Clarke, we'd love it if you could drop a review on your chosen podcasting platform. These reviews really help us to grow our audience, and that in turn helps us to continue to get more high quality guests. To say thanks, each week we'll be picking a random reviewer and sending them out an HPA t-shirt free of charge anywhere in the world. This is also a great place to ask any questions you might have too, and I'll do my best to answer them if your review gets picked. So this week, a big shout out to Bill1125 from the United States, who has said, "Love putting the show on and just getting to know great stories while learning something new about the automotive engineering sector." Oh, great that you are enjoying the podcast, Bill. And if you get in touch with your t-shirt size and shipping details, we'll get a fresh tee shipped straight out to you. All right, that concludes our interview. And before we sign off, I just wanted to mention, for anyone who's been perhaps hiding under a rock and hasn't heard of High Performance Academy before, we are an online training school and we specialize in teaching a range of performance automotive topics, everything from engine tuning and engine building through to wiring, car suspension and wheel alignment, data analysis, and race driver education. Now remember, you've got that coupon code. You can use podcast75 at the checkout to get $75 off the purchase of your first course. You'll find our full course list at hpacademy.com/courses. Important to mention that when you purchase a course from us, that course is yours for life as well. It never expires. You can rewatch the course as many times as you like, whenever you like. The purchase of a course will also give you 3 months of access to our gold membership. That gives you access to our private members only forum, which is the perfect place to get answers to your specific questions. You'll also get access to our regular weekly members webinars, which is where we touch on a particular topic in the performance automotive realm. We dive into that topic for about an hour. If you can watch live, you can ask questions and get answers in real time. If the time zones don't work for you, that's fine too. You're going to get access as a gold member to our previous webinar archive. We've got close to 300 hours of existing content in that archive. It is an absolute goldmine. So remember that coupon code podcast75. Check out our course list at hpacademy.com/courses.